Yeah, gotta aim for the top like, hold up. Yeah, I can never doubt myself, I know better. All of you critics will smoke, but I know when the dust settles that I'm in my element, it's evident.
Kind of take center stage and get a lot of the credit for, its role in velocity development, when really it is, a piece in that, entire puzzle, an opportunity for athletes that have on-ramped well, that have a good level of throwing fitness built up, and are ready to start expressing that through arm speed, right? So we use the extra steps and the momentum to take the arm through some greater degrees of arm speed, to ultimately prepare it for some of the demands of the sport. So who qualifies for it? Those that have gone through a proper on-ramp and build-up of throwing volume and intensity to that point. And for those that need to, prepare for higher intensity throwing, whether it be in their mound prep or, some soon-to-be competition phase of the schedule. Now, the caveat to that is some athletes, it may benefit them to stay longer in that, velocity building phase, with compressions, pull downs, overload, underload, throwing implements and things like that. That's really individualized, right? If we can get a guy built up to, be in that phase, and we feel like it's advantageous and we're continuing to see growth in those environments, we may opt to keep them in that type of throwing phase for a little bit longer. Others, that already have the ability to throw well and throw hard, right? At a certain point, there's diminishing returns on some of those things. So we may opt for that athlete to spend less time in a compression or pull down phase and get them to the mound quicker and spend the extra time on pitch design, whether it's adding a secondary pitch or dialing in, a pitch shape, command, execution, those types of things. So those are the individual pieces that come along with, like, who does pull downs, compressions, why do we do them, how long do we do them? Yeah, so I think there's a few things to look at whenever we're trying to establish is an athlete ready. We look at, it starts really all the way back at the end of their previous competitive season, right? Do we go into a full shutdown period, or do we deload and keep the arm moving just a little bit? And trying to gauge, and with some help from some workload measuring tools, right, where their chronic throwing workload is at. Once we reach an amount of throwing, right, and a chronic workload that we feel like is responsible, with the workload device that we use, we're looking at anywhere from 6 to 8 chronic workload is the measurement that it gives us. But then we're really paying attention to the acute to chronic workload ratio, so that any one given day's workload, whether it's long toss without compressions or long toss with compressions, that we're not exceeding what we're appropriately built up for. So that's where that ACR comes into play, and we'll use that to, as a guide. Obviously, the athlete still has some input on this, but that's really leaving some clues behind for if an athlete's ready to do that or not, or midday when they're doing that, if, hey, like maybe 5 to 10 throws a day is good, or hey, we can go maybe 15 at the end here and let it rip. So just using all the resources available, I think, is how we try to make a good decision on whether or not an athlete's ready to do it. Yeah, so we've really, premier pitching and performance, we're constantly on a sort of quest to better understand what makes a high-level pitcher. We understand that there are mechanical elements to that. We understand that there is a strength and power element to that. We understand, that there are different types of athletes that perform at a high level through different types of movement as well. So recently we've tried to explore and get into what's called motor preferences. There's some really good groups out there that have started to lead the charge, that we've invested in learning on some of those things. So when we look at the biomechanics, we understand that not everybody has to land the same way on their front leg, right? Not everybody has to have their trunk in the same position, okay, to transfer energy effectively for themselves. We can use kinematic sequence velocities to understand, like, is energy getting through the system, but how it gets through the system can be different for each athlete. So motor preferences give us a little bit of a clue into what may benefit an athlete on an individual level. Okay, can they separate the lower half from the upper half? Can they load their arm into retraction? And if not, that's okay. There's still a way, okay, to create and express energy into the baseball. Do athletes have to, load the back hip, knee, ankle the same way, across the board? The answer we all know is no, they do not. But motor preferences starts to lend itself to identifying what might be better strategies on an individual basis as far as biomechanics go. To kind of summarize that, most people look at biomechanics on the average, right? Like the average, high-level thrower, moves this way. We want to take that a layer deeper and say, okay, if you're this type of mover, it probably shifts it to this end of the spectrum a little bit, versus the other type of mover, you're maybe on this end of the spectrum, and both can be effective. So talk about loose versus tight athletes, tall versus short, guys that really use the ground to produce force over a longer period of time versus guys that produce force over shorter periods of time. All of those attributes, okay, are better suited for different types of mechanics. So we'll continue to go down that road. We'll continue to investigate that and create a better understanding of motor preferences and how that might influence biomechanics. Ultimately, we know that athletes have to be strong, powerful, and able to express that through their delivery in order to throw the ball hard, accurate, and stay healthy, which are always key goals of our programs.